Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. A diplomatic push is underway tonight to sit Volodymyr Zelenskyy down with Donald Trump in Washington, as US officials say points of contention remain over a peace deal in Ukraine. At the same time, Moscow insists it will not grant the green light if Vladimir Putin's demands are cut. More in just a moment. First, the latest headlines. The EU's top court rules same-sex marriage should be recognised across the bloc. Foreign workers boost Poland's economic bounce back. And Warsaw confirms it will bid to host the 2040 Summer Olympics. But we begin tonight in Kyiv, where reports are emerging that Ukraine has agreed to slash its peacetime army to 800,000 troops. In fact, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Kyiv is ready to move forward with the US-backed peace plan, barring some, quote, sensitive points. For more, let's go live to our correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So, what do we know?
Well, still, the details, the devil is in the details with something like this, and all of those details are yet to be finalized. But what we do know is that Kyiv is considering sending Zelenskyy to the United States for further talks with Donald Trump in November to try and get this over the line. What we don't know really is how much success this document is going to have. We've already heard from Moscow that they aren't interested in this amended version of the plan, but there certainly seems to be some positivity in the White House. Here's what Donald Trump had to say.
I've also ended 8 wars in 9 months, and we're working on that final war. It's not easy, but I don't know. I think we're going to get there. 25,000 soldiers, Ukraine, Russia. In the last month, 25,000 soldiers have died. So I think we're getting very close to a deal. We'll find out. I thought that one would have been gone quicker. We did 8. I thought that would have been an easier one, but I think we're making progress.
So optimism in the White House there, but doesn't seem to be much optimism on the ground here that we're heading towards any kind of cessation in violence. Russia launched another massive drone and missile attack against Ukraine in the early hours of Tuesday morning, targeting the capital of Kyiv. Largely 7 people dead, 20 others injured. I was earlier outside one of the properties that had been hit, this apartment building. So again, Ukraine is going through a very real struggle while these negotiations are taking place. President Zelenskyy speaking in his nightly address, responding to both these attacks and the diplomatic situation that is ongoing, saying it's important to continue and to accumulate support for both the defense and diplomatic fronts. So clear that Zelenskyy sees the diplomatic element of this important, but meanwhile, the Ukrainian people really are struggling under this Russian bombardment that happens routinely week in, week out, particularly targeting energy infrastructure as we head into winter, Aaron.
Our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee, thank you. Moving to Brussels now, where the European Union's top court has ruled that Poland and other member states must recognise same-sex marriages registered anywhere across the bloc. The decision comes after officials refused to formalise the marriage of a Polish couple who wed in Germany and then returned to their homeland. Our correspondent Alex Cardier is standing by in the Belgian capital and joins me now. Good evening, Alex. So what do we know about this ruling and how is it being received?
Well, good evening, Aaron. A landmark ruling clearly enforcing from the EU's top court the right for the recognition of same-sex marriages across the bloc. That case that you rightly mentioned of 2 men who were married in Germany and wanted that marriage to be recognized in Poland, the court ruled that the decision from Polish authorities not to recognize that marriage infringes not only on the freedom to move and reside, but also on the fundamental right to the respect of private and family life. So clearly a landmark decision which will have an impact not just in Poland, but across the European Union. Let's have a look at how those rights for same-sex marriage look across the bloc. You'll see those countries, particularly in Western Europe, have full recognition of same-sex marriage. They represent more than half of the European Union's population. Those countries more in Central Europe, including Italy, there recognize civil partnerships, if not full same-sex marriage. They represent about 10 to 15% of the European population. And then you have a remaining a group of 4 countries, including Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Bulgaria, where there is a recognition of neither. They will be affected in so much that they have to, according to this court ruling, recognize same-sex marriages that were conducted in other European countries. That does not mean, clearly, that Poland, Romania, Slovakia and others have to allow same-sex marriages to take place in their countries. They just have to recognize those that happened elsewhere. Now, that has drawn criticism from some politicians in Poland in particular. Let's have a look at what the deputy chairman of the Law and Justice Party in Poland had to say about this.
This is not a ruling. It is a gross scandal and a forceful attempt to push left-wing policies through the back door. It has nothing to do with democracy or freedom.
Well, Tobiasz Bocheński there, the deputy chairman of the Law and Justice Party, also a member of the European Parliament. Those Law and Justice politicians taking to social media to criticize what they see as judicial overreach. They do not see that this is the constitutional or judicial responsibility of the European Court. Nevertheless, others celebrating this as a historic landmark for same-sex couples who simply want their marriages to be recognized in their home countries. Many will see this as progress, as the recognition of same-sex marriage, as the recognition of those families. Others will see this as judicial overreach from Brussels. Aaron.
Thank you, Alex Cartier in Brussels. An influx of foreign workers is delivering bang for its buck for Polish companies. More than 1 million foreigners from the likes of Ukraine, Belarus and India now work in the country, helping offset the decline in Poland's working age population over the past decade. Maciej Wilowski reports.
Poland's economy is picking up speed, and an influx of foreign workers is contributing to that success. The number of guest workers living and working in Poland hit a new record in 2025. According to the country's state statistics agency, as of May, the latest month for which data is available, there were 1.07 million foreigners working in Poland, up 4.4% from the same period last year. A survey from the financial consultancy Big Info Monitor found that roughly half of Polish companies employ at least one foreign worker. Poland's workforce has become more diversified in recent years, with foreigners from countries like Belarus, Georgia, and India arriving in greater numbers. But Ukrainians, who began arriving in Poland in large numbers after 2014, make up by far the largest share of guest workers. This influx has helped offset the decline in Poland's working-age population over the past decade.
So while Polish members of the workforce fell by 200,000 since then, Ukrainians increased by 800,000 during the same period. So the Ukrainian immigrants more than offset the demographic impact over the last 10 years and delayed the future demographic impact.
Ukrainians living in Poland tend to have higher rates of employment than those living elsewhere in the EU.
If you look, 75% of Ukrainians of working age that are here have jobs. That compares to 30 to 40% in France and Germany.
These workers provide a vital boost to the economy, which has accelerated this year, with gross domestic product rising at its fastest pace in 3 years. Growth is also being boosted by renewed strength in the industrial sector, which is picking up speed after having stagnated in recent years. Industrial production in the third quarter was up 5.5% compared to the same period last year. That compares with just a 0.8% gain in the first quarter and declines over much of the past 2 years. Renewed industrial vigor and the influx of foreigners into the labor force could give Poland's economic expansion even firmer ground to stand on. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
Is Poland ready to pole vault into 2040? Warsaw has unveiled a new sports development plan with the country's capital eyeing the biggest prize of them all, the Summer Olympics. As Anastasia Yanchenko reports, an official bid is set to be lodged next year.
Paris 2024, Los Angeles 2028, Brisbane 2032, and now Warsaw in 2040. Poland has set an ambitious goal, bringing the Summer Olympics to its capital. The bid is a part of a new Warsaw 2040 sports development strategy.
The actual games, which are obviously very important, are not an end in themselves. They will be the crowning achievement of a great change that will inspire Poles to be more active and make us want to exercise every day.
Beyond the health benefits for the nation, officials say the Games could bring Poland a new wave of international recognition, opening the door to new opportunities.
When it comes to the development of our homeland, can we imagine a better way to promote Poland to the world? Do you remember the Euro 2012 effect? It was something incredible. What would be the impact of hosting the Games in Poland, in Warsaw, across the whole country?
Thus, next year, Poland plans to officially apply to the International Olympic Committee to host the 2040 or 2044 Olympic Games. Warsaw's Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski noted that holding the Games in 2044 would also carry symbolic significance for the capital.
A bid to host the Olympic Games in Warsaw is a major opportunity and a project of civilizational and symbolic significance. One possible date is 2044, marking the 100th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Rising from the ruins of war like a phoenix, Warsaw today is a dynamic, modern metropolis.
Hosting an event of such scale would require developing and constructing key infrastructure, the essential Olympic must-haves, which Warsaw currently lacks.
We don't have an Olympic stadium with an 80,000-seat capacity and an athletics track, the symbol of the Games. Warsaw's national stadium lacks a track and holds a maximum of 57,000 people. We also lack multiple Olympic facilities, including pools and Olympic Village, and there is no vision yet for which part of the city we would like to transform into a new district through the Games.
This is not Poland's first attempt to bring the Olympic Games to the country. Earlier bids included plans for Kraków and Zakopane to host the Winter Games in 2006 and 2022, as well as joint Polish-Czech bid for Karpacz in 2030. Apart from Poland, Germany and Egypt are reportedly eyeing hosting the 2040 Olympics. But the final call is with the International Olympic Committee. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
We return now to our top story, and as Ukraine plans for presidential-level talks with the United States, European leaders are sitting uneasy over the influence Russia could pick up in any potential agreement. The so-called Coalition of the Willing met on Tuesday, with Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski again warning that no decision should be made about Europe without Europe. Gabriela Fesnak reports.
The 28-point US-backed peace proposal for Ukraine had European leaders criticizing its ramifications for the continent's security.
Even if the fighting were to stop now, what remains is an imperial and aggressive Russia whose ambitions extend far beyond Ukraine. Some of these proposals are unacceptable. It is particularly important from the Polish perspective that this was also my opinion, that no agreement, and I emphasize none, can be allowed in any way to undermine the security of Poland and Europe.
Experts believe that several of the points proposed in the draft paved the way for future Russian aggression.
28 points, if accepted, would mean the end of Ukrainian sovereignty, no matter what's written there. And of course, it will allow Putin to concentrate forces to continue his pressure on neighboring countries, including NATO countries.
Consequently, European, American and Ukrainian delegations met in Geneva to work on a counter-proposal.
It was particularly important, in my view, that Europeans and allies were also present in Geneva and able to make their views known. And decisions with implications for Europe and NATO interests need the joint support of European partners and NATO allies respectively. And we are all very clear on that.
Although several European officials were present in Geneva, Poland wasn't invited to participate, despite being the only third country mentioned in the original draft proposal. Poland's absence was noted by the German Foreign Minister Johann Wadepool.
I invited my colleagues in the so-called Washington format, including from France, Poland, Italy, Finland and the United Kingdom, to discuss the situation together with our Ukrainian colleague Andriy Sybiha.
With the input from the UK, Germany and France, the original 28-point peace plan evolved to contain 19 points. It was that version which was discussed by Ukraine's allies, Poland among them, during a virtual meeting of the Coalition of the Willing on Tuesday.
The Coalition of the Willing is currently engaging in talks where I am representing Prime Minister Donald Tusk. More than 40 leaders are on the line, including French President Emmanuel Macron, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. No decisions about us without us.
The absolute condition for a good peace is a set of very robust security guarantees and not paper guarantees. Ukraine has had its share of promises that were shattered by successive Russian aggressions, and real, rock-solid guarantees are a necessity. And this is, I would say, the core mission of this coalition of the willings.
Experts stress that decisive action is necessary to deter Russia from reigniting the conflict in the future.
I believe that Europe will basically force Trump administration to come up with the reasonable plan, but this reasonable plan will not be, most likely, will not be accepted by Russians.
For TVP World, Gabriela Fesnak.
And joining me for an exclusive interview is Michael Carpenter, former security advisor to ex-US President Joe Biden and senior fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Mr. Carpenter, as we go to air, we're hearing that Ukraine has agreed to cap its army at 800,000 troops, that President Zelenskyy is saying Kyiv is ready to largely move forward with America's plans. Of course, land concessions and security guarantees are still up in the air. But in your mind, are these talks the last chance for Kyiv to win over Washington?
No, I don't think so. I don't think this is the last chance, and I don't think these talks are actually going to lead anywhere in the next few weeks. And for the simple fact that I don't see that there is a proposal that will simultaneously meet with the approval of Moscow and Kyiv. And I think this has been the case for a long time. And until the situation on the battlefield or until Russia's economic situation changes significantly for the worse, I don't think we see a prospect for peace coming anytime soon. So what likely will happen is the Europeans will help the United States to craft a proposal that meets with Ukraine's desires. Ukraine will make some concessions, but at the end of the day, that won't be acceptable to Putin. Similarly, the 28 points that came from Russia that were endorsed by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff were unacceptable for Ukraine and for most of America's European allies. So we're kind of stuck in a stalemate without either side being able to accept a proposal that would meet the desires of the other side.
When it comes to Ukraine, and we'll get to the agreeability perhaps of both sides in just a moment, but specifically on Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy last week telling us that his country faces, quote, one of the most difficult moments of its history. He's under a lot of pressure, President Zelenskyy, right now at home. Do you expect him to want to strike somewhat of a deal sooner rather than later? I mean, does he view this potentially as the best or close to the best he's going to get?
No, I don't think so, for the reasons I just outlined. But what I think President Zelenskyy fears most is having another blow up with the United States of the sort that happened in February in that disastrous Oval Office meeting that everybody remembers. And remember that President Zelenskyy and Ukraine very much need U.S. intelligence sharing in order to be able to prosecute the war. And they rely to a great degree on the continuation of what's called the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, which is essentially a NATO terminology for U.S. sales of weapons to European countries that then pass them on to Ukraine. Without the intelligence and without the high-end capabilities coming from the United States, the battlefield tilts in Russia's favor. And so Zelenskyy very much wants to keep up the pretense of a negotiation. He wants to seem constructive. And frankly, I think he can do that and he can make some concessions. But again, that doesn't mean that this is going anywhere. And last thing I'll say, I think Zelenskyy understands very well that a unilateral security guarantee from the United States is not to be trusted. And so without something that really is either NATO's Article 5 or something very similar to it, I don't think he'll sign up to an agreement.
President Zelenskyy is pushing to meet with Donald Trump again in Washington as soon as possible. You mentioned there, obviously, the blow-up back in February. I mean, how thin of a tightrope will he be walking in between insisting on Ukrainian sovereignty but also keeping Donald Trump on side?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty thin tightrope, and that's going to be a difficult balancing act because there are competing camps in the United States in the Trump administration. And so my personal sense from what I've seen and read and from President Trump's endorsement of the 28-point plan is that the president himself favors a solution that is heavily tilted in Russia's favor. And it appears that the vice president is also on the same page. Others, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and perhaps Treasury Secretary Steve Bessent, seem to favor a strategy that imposes further costs on Russia and gives Ukraine a little bit more runway to be able to negotiate something that is more advantageous to Kyiv. But it's going to be a very difficult balancing act. The main thing I think Zelenskyy needs to do is appear constructive and thankful towards the United States, grateful for all the assistance he's received, and hopefully keep the disputes to the closed-doors session.
Do you think the pressure President Zelenskyy is under at home, including the bribery scandal in his country's energy sector, will be playing into this discussion? Will Donald Trump smell weakness in a way?
Oh, I think that's a near certainty. Certainly Zelenskyy feels under pressure. His legitimacy is weaker now than it was just a few weeks ago. This is a very serious corruption scandal that implicates figures very close to Zelenskyy himself. And the United States knows that. And so they know that President Zelenskyy feels the pressure. And so he's going to be perhaps even called out on this corruption scandal in public when he's in Washington. He's going to have a very good response for what he is doing, not just to contain this one scandal, but to make sure that others similar to it don't arise in the future.
Do you think, and I want to come back to what you mentioned right at the beginning of our discussion, do you think that we are at risk here of putting the cart before the horse, that in the end both sides won't agree and we'll be back at square one, and all this talk of pressure on Volodymyr Zelenskyy, pressure on Europe to make a deal right now will be, again, a week, 2 weeks, then months behind us?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is where we will ultimately be at year's end. I don't think this diplomacy is going to produce a breakthrough for the simple reason that Vladimir Putin is not going to want any kind of credible security guarantee that stops the fighting sufficiently to allow Ukraine to proceed with European integration and to create an independent, sovereign, democratic state integrated into the European Union. That is a strategic defeat for Vladimir Putin, and he won't allow for any agreement that gives Ukraine that opportunity. And by the same token, Ukraine is not going to agree to any sort of agreement that would lack those credible security guarantees that will allow for its development as an EU aspirant. And so between President Putin's views on the one hand and President Zelensky's on the other, I don't really see how a balance can be struck until, as I said earlier, until one of the two sides faces a deteriorating situation, either economically or on the battlefield.
Is President Zelenskyy facing enough of a deteriorating situation that might be enough to tip Ukraine into accepting something that perhaps they might not have before?
No, and let's be concrete about this. So what President Putin is demanding from Ukraine is all of the Donbass, all of the oblasts of Donetsk and Luhansk, including the fortress or citadel cities, as they're sometimes called, of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, which are pretty heavily populated cities in western Donetsk. the giving up these cities for Ukraine would be seen by many who have fought in this war and by the public at large as capitulation, as treason. And I think even if Zelensky were willing to make a deal where he would give up these cities and this land, which currently Ukraine controls, of course, I think there would be broad, wide-scale discontent within Ukrainian society, potentially even a mutiny by some of the units within the Ukrainian armed forces. I don't think this would be popular. I don't think he intends to go there. I think it's just simply not feasible for him politically, but it is what Putin is demanding. And again, there is no overlapping Venn diagram between what Putin wants and what Zelensky is able to give.
Now, some take a leaf out of Finland's book, this idea of Finlandization, which was a country largely hamstrung, of course, by a post-Soviet agreement after World War II. Is there a case that Ukraine could be forced to cede land, accept a Kremlin-friendly form of neutrality, but still maintain its independence and ultimately flourish?
Theoretically, yes. But again, Ukraine would need to have some sort of guarantee, either bilateral from the United States or multilateral through NATO, that would be backed up not just by a piece of paper or by a legally binding agreement, but by some sort of practical steps that would signify a true commitment on the part of Western powers to supporting its sovereignty. Absent that, and remember, I mean, Ukraine is a country that suffered through the Budapest Memorandum, which it thought was a credible security guarantee backed by the UK and the United States. But in fact, when Russia violated the terms of that agreement, neither the UK nor the United States came to the defense of Ukraine as they would of a NATO ally, where Article 5 was invoked. And so I think absent something credible that guarantees Ukraine's sovereignty, and Finlandization is not that. Neutrality, as Finland experienced in the decades after World War II, is not going to secure Ukraine's future. And so I don't think they're going to go for any sort of solution that has a similar structure to it.
You were Joe Biden's security advisor when he was in office. Are we closer to peace now than we were under President Joe Biden?
No, we're not. I truly believe the solution lies in empowering Ukraine to defend itself and finally imposing serious sanctions on the Russian war machine. And, you know, I regret that more was not done during the Biden administration in which I served. Certainly sanctions were imposed both by the EU and by the United States, but not nearly enough to cripple the war machine such that Putin might have to consider seriously whether to abandon the fighting on the battlefield. He's weathered well over 1 million casualties in terms of dead and wounded. That has not deterred him. His economy actually grew in both 2023 and 2024. So the economic sanctions clearly have not had the impact that a lot of Western leaders claim they've had. So I truly believe that more pressure needs to be put on Russia economically. Ukraine needs to be given the means to defend itself. And then potentially we could see a situation where Mr. Putin might be willing to make a deal and cut his losses. But we're not there yet.
We're running out of time, but I want to end with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who says Russia is trying to weaken European security with these Ukraine negotiations. He's insisting that these talks matter, of course, beyond just Kyiv. Is Europe, in your mind, especially the eastern flank, I'm talking about the likes of Poland here too, facing one of its most dangerous moments in recent history?
Yes. Put quite simply, yes. This is a moment of peril for the future of European security because it could very well be decided without key players at the table. And countries like Poland need to be able to have a voice. There should not be discussions of European security without Poland at the table and without, frankly, all of those eastern flank states' voices represented. Because the United States has been saying that it has an America First policy. Europe should defend itself. Europe should develop the capabilities so that it can deter future Russian aggression. Well, that's all well and fine. But if Europe is facing a choice of whether to protect its own future, then it needs to have a say in how this agreement to end the war turns out, because ultimately that will dictate the European security architecture that Europe is dealing with for the next few decades.
Mr. Michael Carpenter, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on TVP World.
My pleasure.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.